Eli woke to the smell of salt and damp earth. His body ached as if he'd been dragged through gravel, and his mouth was as dry as sand. When he opened his eyes, the sky was a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain. He pushed himself upright, finding himself on a beach littered with objects. Tarnished rings, faded wallets, old shoes, broken watches, and frayed journals, all scattered like debris after a storm. He wasn't alone. Around him, others began to stir, strangers, none of whom he recognized. A woman with long dark hair, her face pinched in confusion. A middle-aged man clutching his head as if it were about to split open. A teenager with wide, anxious eyes. They all looked as lost as Eli felt. "Where are we?" the woman asked, her voice tight. No one answered. They were all too busy trying to make sense of the beach, the endless sea before them, and the strange array of personal belongings strewn across the shore. "I don't remember how I got here," the man said. "Does anyone else remember?" Eli shook his head, frowning. His last memory was fuzzy, like a dream half forgotten upon waking. He could recall flashes, a city, loud and bustling, a bridge, the sound of tires screeching on wet asphalt. But everything else was a blur. "I'm Eli," he offered, hoping introductions might help settle the rising tension. The others followed his lead. The woman was named Rachel, the man, Greg, and the teenager was Nora. But no names brought clarity or comfort. They were strangers still, linked only by their mutual confusion. Rachel knelt down and picked up an old wallet, flipping it open. "It's empty," she said, voice hollow. "No ID, just nothing." Greg knelt beside a ring, its once bright gold now dull and crusted with sea salt. "These things," he muttered, "they feel important." "They are," Nora said softly. She was staring at a small leather-bound journal in her hands. "They belong to people." "How do you know that?" Greg asked. Nora shrugged but didn't answer. Eli felt a shiver crawl up his spine. She wasn't wrong. He could sense it too, an odd connection between the objects and the people they had once belonged to. The question was, where were those people now? The island wasn't large, but as the group ventured inward, they found more belongings, piles of them. Clothing folded neatly on rocks, shoes lined up along paths, photographs nailed to the trunks of trees. The further they walked, the eerier it became. It was as though the island had been collecting things, hoarding them, as if afraid they might be forgotten. "We need to figure out what's going on," Greg said, a slight tremor in his voice. "We can't just wander around here." Nora looked up from the journal she'd been carrying. I think this is a place for people who were never found." "What do you mean?" Eli asked, though deep down, a pit was forming in his stomach. He had a feeling he already knew. Nora hesitated, her fingers tracing the edges of the journal's leather cover. People who went missing. People who died, but no one ever claimed them. They never had closure. Greg scoffed. "That's ridiculous. We're alive. We're standing here, aren't we?" But Eli wasn't so sure. The memories were coming back in fragmented pieces now, sharp like shards of broken glass. The bridge, the rain, the screech of tires. His heart pounded in his chest as he recalled the moment when the car skidded, when he lost control, when everything went black. "What if we're not alive?" Eli whispered. The others turned to him, their faces pale and stricken. Rachel shook her head vehemently. "No, we can't be dead. That doesn't make sense." But it did. The objects, the unclaimed things, it was all starting to fit together. Eli picked up a tarnished watch from a nearby boulder. As soon as his fingers closed around it, a memory flashed before his eyes. A man sitting in a cafe, waiting for someone who never arrived. The watch had once been his. He'd been lost, forgotten, just like them. "This place," Eli said, his voice shaking, "it's a trap. We're dead, and we're stuck here because no one found us. No one remembers us." Rachel staggered backward, dropping the wallet she'd been holding as if it had burned her. No, this can't be happening." Greg looked at the sky, his face turning gray. "If we're dead, how do we leave?" Nora was still clutching the journal, her knuckles white. "I don't think we can. Not unless we remember what really happened to us." They wandered the island for hours, picking through the belongings, each lost in their own thoughts. With every item Eli touched, more memories flooded back. The car accident, the screech of brakes, the moment of impact, when his world went dark and cold. Rachel was the first to break. She found a silver locket hanging from a tree branch, and when she opened it, the sight of a tiny photograph sent her to her knees. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the locket to her chest. "I had a daughter," she sobbed. "She was supposed to meet me that night, but she never came." Nora knelt beside her, silent. The journal in her hands trembled, and she finally spoke. "I was in a fire, I think. I think I died trying to save my family, but no one found me. No one even knew I was there." Greg paced nearby, shaking his head, his eyes wild. "This can't be real. I had a life, a job. I was..." His words broke off as he spotted something half buried in the sand. A pair of broken glasses. He picked them up with trembling hands, staring at them as if they held the answers to everything. "These were mine," he whispered. I think I fell. I don't remember how, but I fell, and no one was there to help me." The truth was unraveling around them, each revelation a new piece of their own tragic puzzles. But the more they remembered, the darker the island seemed to become. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the sky overhead grew darker still, as if the island itself was reacting to their memories. "The island doesn't want us to leave," Eli said quietly. He could feel it now, the oppressive weight of the place, pushing down on them, trying to keep them from fully understanding. It thrived on their confusion, their fear. As long as they didn't remember, they would stay trapped here, just like all the others whose belongings littered the shore. "But we have to," Rachel said, her voice thick with determination. "I need to see my daughter again, even if it's just once more." Nora nodded. "We all need to face what happened. It's the only way out." Eli wasn't so sure. The island felt alive now, breathing and pulsing with malevolent intent. It had no desire to let them go. It wanted them to forget again, to wander in its clutches forever, like the others whose stories were scattered across its sands. But they couldn't stay, not like this. "We have to confront the truth," Eli said, glancing at the others. "We have to remember everything, even if it hurts." They stood on the beach, the tide lapping at their feet as they faced the truth of their fates. One by one, the memories came crashing back, the final moments of their lives, the pain, the fear, the overwhelming sense of loss. It was brutal and raw, but necessary. Eli closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the island lifting as he fully remembered the car accident, the way his car had plunged off the bridge, sinking into the dark, cold water. He had died that night, and no one had come looking for him, but now, he knew, he remembered. The island shuddered, the wind howling louder than ever, but it was too late. They had reclaimed their lives, what little remained of them. And with that, the island began to fade, its hold on them loosening. One by one, the strangers disappeared, leaving behind the island of unclaimed things, where the forgotten would wait for others to find them, to remember them, and to set them free. Eli was the last to go. With a deep breath, he stepped into the tide, feeling the cold embrace of the water, and let himself be claimed. At last. March 3rd, 9:14 p.m. "Hi, Sarah. Just wanted to drop a quick line and see how you're doing. Things are fine here, I guess. It's been quiet around the house, and you know how bad I am with quiet. It feels like it's everywhere these days. I keep thinking I hear things, probably just my mind playing tricks. Anyway, hope you're well. Right back soon? Rachel." March 5th, 11:02 p.m. "Hey, thanks for the reply. I know it sounds silly, but I've been feeling a bit on edge lately. It's probably just stress. Mark's been in one of his quiet moods. I'm sure it's work or something, but you know how he can get. A little withdrawn, then a bit distant. Sometimes I wonder if it's something I did, even though he says it's not, and the way he looks at me. I don't know. There's just something in his eyes lately. Anyway, maybe it's just me being paranoid. I'll stop whining. Talk soon. Rachel." March 7th, 2:47 a.m. "Sarah, can I tell you something without you thinking I've gone off the deep end? Mark came home late tonight again. No explanation, just work. I asked if he'd eaten and he said yes, but didn't say what. Just stood there, looking at me, like..." like he didn't recognize me. When I went to bed, I felt this strange pressure in the room, like someone watching. I swear I heard him standing by the doorway, just breathing. But when I looked, he wasn't there. But I know he was. It's like he's always watching now, always just there. Sorry, I sound crazy, don't I? Rachel. March 9th, 5:21 p.m. Hey Sarah, no, I haven't told anyone else. I mean, what would I even say? My husband is acting strange? It would sound so stupid. He hasn't done anything wrong, not really. He's just not taught himself. I know it sounds like I'm making this up, but there's something in his eyes that wasn't there before. Something dark. And last night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing this soft scratching noise, like something tapping against the window. I wanted to ignore it, but it was relentless. Finally, I got up, turned on the light, and it stopped. Just like that. But when I looked out the window, he was standing in the yard, just staring up at the bedroom. I thought maybe he'd gone outside for a smoke or something, but he doesn't smoke. Never has. I didn't ask him about it today. I'm not sure I want to know the answer. Rachel. March 12th, 12:13 a.m. Sarah, things are getting worse. I tried to talk to Mark tonight, just casual stuff to break the tension. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there staring at me like he was studying me or dissecting me with his eyes. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't ask questions you don't want answers to, Peanut." What is that supposed to mean? I feel like I'm living with a stranger. Peanut? He has never called me Peanut. I feel like I'm sleeping next to a stranger. And I don't know what's worse, that he's becoming someone I don't recognize, or that I'm starting to feel like I'm the one who's losing my mind. I don't know what to do, Sarah. Rachel. March 14th, 3:15 a.m. Sarah. I'm sorry if these emails are getting weird. I know you've got your own stuff to deal with, but I don't know who else to talk to. Mark has been different, more aggressive. Last night he reached out like he was going to touch my face, but his hand just hovered there shaking. And his eyes, Sarah, they looked hollow, like he wasn't there at all. I backed away, and he laughed, this low, strange laugh that didn't sound like him. He went to bed after that, just left me standing there, heart pounding like I was being chased. I barely slept, and when I did, I kept having nightmares. In one of them, I was lying in bed, unable to move, and he was standing over me holding a knife. I think I'm afraid of him. I think he knows I'm afraid of him. Rachel. March 16th, 4:52 a.m. Sarah, I tried to leave tonight. I thought maybe some time apart would help, that maybe we both needed some space. But when I went to the front door, he was there, just standing, blocking my way. He didn't say anything, just stared. When I asked him to move, he smiled. Not a real smile, though, one of those cold, dead smiles, like he was letting me know I wasn't going anywhere. I backed down, told him I was just going to bed, and he said, "Good girl, Peanut. Good girl, Sarah," like I was a child or a pet. He's never spoken to me like that before. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. What am I supposed to do? I feel like a prisoner in my own home. Rachel. March 18th, 2:03 a.m. Sarah. I think I'm being followed. I went to the store today, trying to get a break. But every time I turned a corner, I felt like someone was behind me, watching. When I got home, I found the front door unlocked. I know I locked it before I left. Mark acted like nothing happened, didn't even mention it. But when I went to the kitchen, there was this strange smell, metallic, like blood. I looked around but couldn't find anything. I don't feel safe anymore, Sarah. I don't know if I ever will again. Rachel. March 21st, 6:30 a.m. Sarah, I woke up to find him sitting by the bed, watching me. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days, and he had this smile. The same smile as before, but worse. I asked him what he was doing, and he just said, "Waiting." I don't know what he's waiting for. I don't think I want to know. Rachel. March 23rd, 5:09 a.m. Sarah, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm so scared. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I hear things in the night, footsteps outside my door, and when I open it, there's no one there. But I know it's him. I know he's just waiting for something. He barely speaks to me now, just stares. But sometimes I catch him muttering under his breath things I can't understand, and his hands. They're always shaking now, like he's trying to hold something back. I don't know if I'll make it through this, Sarah. Rachel. March 25th, 4:12 a.m. Sarah, if something happens to me, please don't let it be forgotten. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know he's planning something. Tonight, he cornered me in the kitchen, pressed me up against the wall. He didn't say anything, just stood there, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. His eyes looked empty, like there was nothing human left inside. I thought he was going to kill me, Sarah. I thought that was it, but then he just turned and left. I don't think I can survive much more of this, Rachel. March 27th, 2:19 a.m. Sarah, I'm sorry if this is the last email you get from me. Tonight, he came into the room, knife in hand. He looked at me and there was something in his face, something almost like regret. He just stood there holding the knife staring at me, and then he whispered, "It's almost time, Peanut." I don't know what that means. I don't think I want to know. Please, if you don't hear from me again, tell someone. Tell anyone. Rachel. March 30th, 3:00 a.m. Hey, Sarah. False alarm. Mark has been great the last couple of days. I must have just been imagining things. Everything is fine. Going on a long vacation now, not sure when I'll talk to you again. Love, Peanut. It began on an otherwise unremarkable evening. Samuel Bell, a man in his late 30s with dark hair flecked prematurely with gray, sat alone in his cramped apartment. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting pools of orange light over dog-eared books and the remnants of past ambitions. He had just drifted into a restless sleep when the dream came, vivid, charged, unlike any he had ever experienced. He was 10 years old again, standing on the cracked sidewalk of his childhood neighborhood. The sun hung low, tinged with an amber glow that felt almost tangible. Every detail was precise, the distant rumble of a passing train, the musty scent of summer rain clinging to the air. Samuel knew he was dreaming, but this was different. He could feel the warmth on his skin, hear the chatter of his parents arguing from an open window. A wave of nostalgia swept through him, bittersweet and sharp. This was the day he had broken his arm after being dared by his older brother, Jason, to leap from the garage roof. He looked up, saw the rusted metal edge, and felt an urge, a compulsion, to change what would come next. He didn't know why, but he did. Turning, he walked away from the garage, a triumphant smile on his face as he heard Jason's voice calling, confused, behind him. When he woke up, a strange sensation settled over him. It was like waking from a deep sleep in a room he didn't recognize. The morning light seemed paler, and the apartment was quieter than usual. He shook it off, dismissing it as a remnant of the vivid dream. It wasn't until he glanced at the mantel, where a collection of family photos sat, that he noticed the first change. In a frame he'd seen countless times, there was now a photograph he didn't remember. A picture of his mother sitting alone on a park bench, her face tired, without the spark he remembered. He picked it up, fingers trembling. The memory attached to the picture flooded his mind. She had spent more time alone after that day, worrying about Jason's increasingly reckless behavior. Samuel staggered back, the frame slipping from his grasp and shattering on the floor. It was impossible, he told himself, but doubt had already taken root. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of traffic outside, haunted by what he'd seen. The dreams came more frequently, like whispers from a world he couldn't resist. Each time, he ventured into them willingly, revisiting moments both significant and small, stopping a fight at school that had left him bruised for weeks, making a friend he'd once ignored, speaking up instead of staying silent. Each time he woke to subtle, disquieting changes. His walls painted a different color. A neighbor he'd known for years no longer recognized him. It was after the 5th time he altered a memory that he realized the implications were becoming more sinister. The air felt denser, a tangible tension lacing every interaction. Friends stopped calling. His boss at the accounting firm he worked at seemed to eye him with cold suspicion, as though seeing something Samuel couldn't fathom. His brother, Jason, once a distant but steady presence, had disappeared from his life altogether. A quick search through old emails confirmed it. There had been no messages exchanged in years. In this new present, they hadn't spoken since they were teenagers. Samuel's desperation grew. The changes were out of control, but the dreams kept calling him back, taunting him with opportunities to fix what had been ruined. Each night, the choice felt inevitable, like a fever he couldn't break. On the 10th night, Samuel found himself back in the family's old dining room, the wallpaper yellowed with age, the chairs squeaking beneath their weight. It was an evening he remembered vividly, the night his father announced he was leaving for good. A cold ball of dread settled in his stomach as he watched the scene unfold. His mother, eyes wet and angry, his father's back stiff as he walked to the door. The echo of a slammed door punctuating a silence that would haunt Samuel for years. This time he spoke. "Don't go," he said, his voice strangled. His father hesitated, a shadow of doubt flickering in his eyes before the door closed behind him anyway. Samuel woke up gasping, the echo of that slam reverberating in his mind. But the world that greeted him was a stranger's. The apartment was sparse, almost clinical. Gone were the familiar mismatched books, the framed photos of places he hadn't visited in years. There was only one picture now, stark and cold, his father's portrait, eyes hollow, beneath the headline of an obituary framed in silver. A shiver ran down Samuel's spine as he read, "Beloved father and respected educator dies under mysterious circumstances." The changes were no longer small. The butterfly effect, he realized with a sinking dread, had unfurled wings that spanned lives. His father hadn't left, he had stayed, only to descend into a spiral that ended in tragedy. Samuel tried to piece together the life he now occupied but found gaps everywhere. He had colleagues at work he couldn't recall meeting, routines that felt foreign. His body moved through them with a mechanic's detachment, while his mind raged against the impossibility of it all. By the 15th visit to Memory Lane, Samuel's dreams were no longer under his control. The moments he found himself reliving were twisted, perversions of his memories. The garage roof from his childhood had changed. Now it loomed like the entrance to a maw. His brother's voice echoed, bitter and venomous. "Why didn't you listen? Why did you leave me there?" Samuel reached for him, only for Jason to vanish into the shadows, leaving behind only the scent of rust and something sour. In the waking world, the silence deepened. A storm gathered outside, relentless rain drumming against the window like nails. The city, usually alive with noise, felt muted. Neighbors passed him with eyes that didn't quite meet his own, and when Samuel spoke to them, they looked through him, as if to someone behind him, someone he couldn't see. Panic clawed at him. He had to set things right. But when he closed his eyes and slipped into the dreams again, it was different. The spaces between memories were filled with dark figures watching him from afar, their features shrouded in haze. When he ran, the streets narrowed, the buildings folded in on themselves like a labyrinth. He was trapped in his own mind, in the consequences of his tampering. He tried to go back to the very beginning, to the day he'd first found his way to Memory Lane, but the scene fractured like glass beneath a hammer's strike. Voices layered on top of each other, his brother's, his mother's, strangers' voices calling his name, accusing, demanding answers. Samuel fell to his knees, the darkness pressing in. When he woke, it was to an apartment stripped of even its most basic comforts. The city outside had grown silent, shrouded in a fog so thick that shapes barely moved within it. The phone lines were dead, the screen on his TV filled with static. The only sound was the rain and a faint tapping, like someone knocking on a distant door. He walked to the window and saw them, faces blurred as if smeared by an unseen hand, gathered at the edge of the street, staring up at him. He backed away, the breath catching in his chest as the tapping grew louder, now at his door. His father's voice, flat and empty, whispered through the keyhole. "You shouldn't have changed it, Samuel." Samuel sank to the floor, eyes wide and unfocused. The past had eaten the present. The future held only shadows, long and hungry. And in the distance, the figures waited, patient, for the man who had dared to tread down Memory Lane. bustling city of Florence, where art was both a trade and a calling, Giovanni Bellamonte's name was yet to be known. The streets echoed with tales of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, leaving little room for those who had yet to prove their genius. Giovanni, a gaunt man in his late 30s with hollow cheeks and eyes that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights, stood in the shadow of such greats, striving for recognition. He worked tirelessly in a crumbling studio on the edge of the Arno River. His canvases, stretched taut and pale as ghosts, bore witness to countless failed attempts. Despite meticulous brushwork and compositions planned to the finest detail, his works lacked something indefinable but essential: soul. Patrons would stop by, murmur polite words, and then shuffle away, their purses untouched. It was always the same story, almost, but never enough. Giovanni's only solace was his wife, Isabella. She was as luminous as the Florentine dawn, her presence warm enough to ward off the creeping despair that clung to their lives like mold. Yet, as Giovanni sank deeper into frustration, their little home became heavy with silence. Isabella, who had once hummed as she prepared their modest meals, now paced anxiously while Giovanni stared blankly at his canvases, his mind tangled in thoughts of failure. One evening, as rain tapped incessantly against the warped window panes, Giovanni sat hunched over yet another unfinished piece. The light of a single candle flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room. Exhausted and on the brink of desperation, he pressed the heel of his palm against his forehead, muttering to himself, "You seek more than you can give, Giovanni." The voice was soft, no louder than a breath. He shot up, eyes darting to find its source, but the room remained empty save for the flitting shadows. The whispers returned, not as words this time, but as an insistent hissing, like dry leaves on stone. Giovanni pressed his hands against his ears, but it did little to block out the sound. Panic rose in him as he saw the shadows seem to slither along the walls, dancing like wraiths. "Madness," he whispered, shaking his head. Yet the hiss faded only when Isabella appeared at the door, her eyes soft with worry. "Come to bed, Giovanni," she pleaded. But he turned away, consumed by a new fear. Over the next few days, the whispers would come and go, brushing the edges of his mind like a half-remembered tune. Giovanni became increasingly irritable, snapping at Isabella over trivialities, his frustration boiling over as the completed commissions refused to materialize. One fateful evening, as Giovanni grappled with yet another failure, the whispers surged, louder and more urgent than before. He whirled around, his eyes wild, and saw nothing but Isabella's frightened face, her hands clutched at her chest. "Giovanni, what is happening to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Stay away," he shouted, pushing her aside as he stormed to the window. The rain had returned, thrumming against the glass, a maddening echo of the whispers in his mind. He felt Isabella's hand on his arm, and something snapped inside him. He flung her hand away with more force than intended. Isabella staggered backward, her foot caught on the leg of a chair, and she fell. The sound of her skull striking the floor was a sickening thud that silenced the whispers and the rain alike. The room fell into a deep, unnatural quiet as Giovanni turned, eyes wide with horror, to see her lifeless body sprawled out, a small trickle of blood seeping from her temple. The candle's light flickered, illuminating her face in a soft, mournful glow. Giovanni dropped to his knees, choking on disbelief. But before he could cry out, the whispers returned, no longer teasing but commanding. "Paint." He resisted at first, repulsed by the idea, but as the hours dragged on, the whispers intensified, gnawing at him until he relented, numb and broken. With trembling hands, he propped Isabella up in her favorite chair, arranging her with a painter's precision. He chose his finest canvas, one that he had once reserved for the masterpiece he dreamed would secure his place among the greats. Each brushstroke was a prayer for forgiveness. Giovanni mixed his paints with an exactness bordering on madness, blending ochres and vermilions to mimic the flush of her skin, the jet black of her hair. He painted through the night, the whispers offering guidance, their dark counsel urging him on. Dawn arrived like a thief, creeping into the room with shafts of pale light. Giovanni stepped back to look at what he had created. The painting was unlike any of his previous work. Isabella's eyes seemed to follow him, glistening with a life that was both beautiful and terrible. The faintest hint of a smile played at her lips, so true to her memory that it brought tears to his eyes. But his elation was short-lived. The whispers, now triumphant, subsided into silence, replaced by a voice that was unmistakably hers. "Giovanni, what have you done?" Word spread quickly when a local patron stumbled upon the painting during a visit. He was so moved by the piece that he paid a small fortune for it and showcased it in his gallery. It was hailed as a work of stunning emotional depth, a testament to Giovanni's genius. Invitations flooded in, and soon his name was on the lips of Florence's elite. But success came at a steep price. Each night, as he lay in bed, the voice of Isabella haunted him. Sometimes it was a sob, other times it was laughter that would curdle his blood. And the whispers, those relentless shadows, returned with every glance at his newfound fame. The masterpiece became a symbol of Giovanni's fall from grace. He could not refuse the wealth and recognition it brought, but he refused every request to paint again. When patrons would visit, marveling at the soulful piece, Giovanni would stare past them, seeing only Isabella's eyes, pleading and unforgiving. As the months passed, Giovanni grew gaunt, his mind unraveling like a thread pulled too tight. He locked himself in his studio, refusing to leave. The once glorious painting now seemed a mockery of his lost love. Whispers taunted him with accusations, each hiss coiling around his heart like a serpent. Giovanni began to truly unravel. As weeks and months continued to pass, Giovanni slipped into drink and began wandering the stone streets of Florence in a drunken stupor. One night, he slipped into a tavern. It must have been nearing closing as all but one seat was vacant. Candlelight lit the stony walls, and Giovanni approached the lone man sitting in the corner. What began as a dark conversation between two struggling drunks slowly turned to something even darker in Giovanni's mind. The two men left the tavern together. "Come back to my studio," Giovanni slurred. That would be the last time that lone bar patron would ever be seen again, until he appeared on canvas in Giovanni's gallery. When the gallery attendees found him the next morning, Giovanni was slumped against his easel, his eyes wide and unseeing, a smile of both terror and relief on his lips. The people attending were in awe of the detail and emotion laid out on Giovanni's newest canvas. It just seemed so real and raw. This would be the beginning of a long, lucrative, and infamous career. As the last patron left the gallery for the evening, a crumpled piece of parchment blew in through the door. It was a newsprint from earlier that day that read, "Missing man found dead in alley." A crooked grin slowly appeared on Giovanni's face as he knew exactly where to find any future inspiration. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. If you have an idea for a short, scary story, leave it in the comments below. See you at the next campfire.